My parents sold my house while I was at my own wedding, so I sued them. Before we begin the story, make sure to subscribe to our channel and never miss more incredible stories every day. I was still wearing my just married t-shirt when a stranger opened the front door of the house I owned. My hand was frozen midair. The brass key jammed uselessly into a lock that no longer matched the familiar grooves. Beside me, my husband Noah was holding our two heavy suitcases, his sunburned face instantly dropping its relaxed honeymoon smile. We had just spent 2 glorious weeks in Italy, entirely disconnected from the world, celebrating the start of our new life together. But standing on the porch of my beautifully renovated suburban home, the home I had scraped, bled, and starved to buy completely on my own, my reality violently snapped in half. The man standing in my foyer looked just as confused as I was. He was holding a paint roller, and behind him, the sage-green walls I had spent weeks agonizing over were being slathered in a sterile, cheap contractor white. "Can I help you?" he asked, eyeing Noah's luggage with a mix of suspicion and extreme annoyance. "I think you're at the wrong address, folks. This is my house," I stammered, my voice sounding incredibly small, thin, and hollow. "I own this house. Who are you and why are you inside?" The man frowned, wiping a streak of white paint from his forehead. "Look, lady, I don't know what kind of scam you're trying to pull, but my wife and I just bought this property last week. We have the deed right there on the kitchen island. I suggest you get off my porch before I call the cops. How do you process the fact that your sanctuary has been stolen right out from under you?" I peered past his shoulder, desperate for any familiar sight, but my custom oak entryway table was gone. My vintage rug was gone. The framed photos of Noah and me were gone. Every single trace of my existence had been scrubbed clean. My stomach plummeted into a terrifying freefall as the sickening realization began to wash over me. I didn't know it yet, but the people who had erased my life weren't strangers, thieves in the night, or random squatters. They were the two people who were supposed to protect me at all costs. I looked at the man holding the deed, feeling cold fury ignite within me. To understand the sheer audacity of what happened next, you have to understand my family dynamic. I am Olivia, and for 28 years, I have been the invisible workhorse of my family. I was the reliable, fiercely independent scapegoat, while my brother Brent was the undeniable golden child. Brent is 26, naturally charismatic, completely lazy, and chronically allergic to consequences. Growing up, my parents, Arthur and Susan, bent over backward to accommodate his every whim. When Brent totaled his first car while driving under the influence, they quietly bought him a new one and told me I couldn't go to my dream college because funds were tight. When Brent dropped out of university to find himself on a backpacking trip across Asia, I was working double shifts at a diner to pay my own community college tuition. They never saw my struggles. They only saw his endless potential. Over the years, their blatant favoritism morphed into an ugly entitlement. They constantly expected me to drop my life to help him, whether it was fixing his resume, lending him my car, or giving him cash. 5 years ago, I finally snapped. I stopped taking their calls, stopped bailing him out, and funneled every single ounce of my energy into my career. I worked 80-hour weeks, saved every penny, and finally bought my own beautiful 3-bedroom house in the suburbs. It was my ultimate pride and joy, a physical manifestation of my hard work and independence. Noah moved in shortly after we got engaged, and together, we turned it into a true sanctuary. It was supposed to be the safe haven where we would start our family, completely separate from the toxic chaos of my parents and my brother. I truly believed I was safe from their constant manipulation and financial black holes. I had built a fortress to keep them out, but it wasn't strong enough. The mechanism they used to steal my house was actually planted 2 years before the wedding, disguised as a gesture of parental concern. I had contracted a severe case of pneumonia that rapidly escalated into sepsis. I was hospitalized for 10 terrifying days, drifting in and out of a feverish delirium. Noah and I had only been dating for a year at that point, so my parents were technically my legal next of kin. I remember waking up in my hospital bed, my arms bruised from 4 lines, feeling weaker than I ever had in my life. My mother, Susan, was sitting beside me, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. She told me the doctors were worried I might need to be put on a ventilator if my oxygen levels didn't improve. "We just want to make sure everything is taken care of, Olivia." My father, Arthur whispered smoothly, sliding a clipboard onto my lap. This is just a standard emergency medical directive. It lets us make decisions for you if you become incapacitated and allows us to handle your bills so your mortgage doesn't default while you're sick. My vision was blurry, and my brain was completely foggy from the heavy doses of antibiotics and painkillers. I trusted them. In that moment of intense vulnerability, I believed they were genuinely trying to help their sick daughter. I weakly scrawled my signature on the dotted line, handing the clipboard back to my father. I didn't read the fine print. I didn't realize it wasn't just a medical directive. It was a broad, sweeping, durable power of attorney. It gave them full legal authority to manage my assets, access my bank accounts, and, crucially, sign real estate documents on my behalf. I recovered from the infection, went home, and completely forgot about the clipboard. I had blindly handed them the weapon they would later use to destroy me. Fast forward to the week of my wedding. Anyone who has ever planned a wedding knows the final days are a complete blur of anxiety, vendor confirmations, and sleepless nights. But amidst the chaos, my parents were acting incredibly strange. For the first time in my entire adult life, they were being overly helpful. Susan insisted on paying for our massive 2-week honeymoon to Italy as a special wedding gift. Arthur was constantly offering to run errands, pick up dry cleaning, and manage the house while we packed. It felt bizarre, but I was so exhausted and overwhelmed with the wedding details that I just accepted it as a rare moment of parental affection. Noah was slightly suspicious. Your dad literally offered to mow our lawn while we're in Rome, Noah noted one evening, folding shirts into his suitcase. Since when does Arthur do manual labor for anyone but Brent? I brushed it off, too excited about marrying the love of my life to dwell on their sudden personality transplant. Let them be nice, Noah. Maybe they finally realize I'm actually getting married and moving on with my life. The wedding day itself was beautiful. My parents played the role of the loving, supportive family perfectly for the cameras. They toasted to our future, danced at the reception, and waved enthusiastically as Noah and I got into the car heading for the airport. Susan actually hugged me tight and whispered, "Don't worry about a single thing back home. Just enjoy your trip, sweetie. We have everything completely under control." I thought she meant checking the mail and watering the houseplants. I didn't realize she was securing an empty house for a lucrative real estate transaction. They were eagerly packing my bags so they could steal my life entirely unnoticed. The honeymoon was absolute, unadulterated bliss. Noah and I spent our days wandering through the cobblestone streets of Florence, eating incredible pasta, and drinking wine overlooking the Amalfi Coast. We made a strict pact to keep our phones on airplane mode to avoid any work emails or family drama. For 13 days, I existed in a perfect bubble of happiness, entirely disconnected from the reality waiting for me back in the States. However, on the morning of our flight back home, I finally connected my phone to the hotel's Wi-Fi to check our flight status. A barrage of notifications instantly flooded my screen. Mixed in with congratulations and spam emails was a text message from my next-door neighbor, Mrs. Higgins. It was dated 5 days ago. "Hey Olivia, just saw a big moving truck at your place. Hope you guys aren't moving right after the wedding." My heart did a weird stutter in my chest. I immediately called my mother. She answered on the second ring, sounding unnervingly cheerful. "Oh, honey, how is Italy?" she chirped. I ignored the pleasantries. "Mom, Mrs. Higgins texted me about a moving truck at the house. What is going on?" Susan didn't even miss a beat. Her voice remained perfectly calm and soothing. "Oh, that. Don't even worry about it, sweetie. Remember those old couches and the dining set you said you wanted to donate before the wedding? Arthur finally got around to organizing the charity pickup. They sent a huge box truck for it. It's all handled." It made perfect sense. I had indeed mentioned wanting to upgrade our living room furniture eventually. Her explanation was so smooth, so entirely believable, that the tiny seed of panic in my chest instantly dissolved. I thanked her, feeling slightly foolish for jumping to conclusions, and boarded my 12-hour flight back to America. I hung up the phone, completely oblivious to the horrific crime unfolding back home. The exhaustion of international travel hit us hard by the time our Uber pulled into our suburban driveway. It was late afternoon, the sun casting long shadows across the freshly cut lawn. Noah grabbed the suitcases from the trunk, and I practically dragged myself up the front steps, dreaming only of my own shower and my own bed. That's when I pulled out my keys and encountered the jammed lock. The terrifying confrontation with the man in my foyer escalated quickly. When I refused to leave the porch, the man, whose name was apparently Greg, made good on his threat and called the local police. 10 minutes later, a cruiser pulled up and 2 uniformed officers stepped onto my lawn. I ran up to them, tears of frustration streaming down my face. "Officers, this man has broken into my house. I have the mortgage statements on my phone to prove I live here." The older officer held up a hand, calmly asking everyone to step back. Greg confidently marched out the front door, holding a thick manila folder. He handed a document to the officer. "I bought this property in a cash sale closing last Thursday. Here is the recorded deed, signed, notarized, and filed with the county." The officer reviewed the document carefully, his brow furrowing. He looked at my digital mortgage statement, then back at Greg's physical deed. "Ma'am," the officer finally said, turning to me with a heavy sigh, "this deed appears to be completely valid and legally recorded. It shows the property was transferred by your legal representative. Since he has the recorded deed and the keys, I cannot force him to leave." "But I didn't sell my house," I screamed, the panic finally shattering my composure. "I was in Italy." The officer looked at me with pity and told me I had to leave. The police officers were sympathetic, but their hands were tied. They explained that because the deed was officially filed with the county clerk, this was strictly a civil matter, not a criminal burglary. If I wanted my house back, I would have to take it up with the courts. Noah gently guided my trembling body back into the Uber, instructing the driver to take us to a nearby extended-stay motel. Once we were checked into a dingy, smoke-smelling room, I completely broke down. I sobbed until my ribs ached, curled into a tight ball on the ugly floral bedspread. But the nightmare wasn't over. Greg, the new owner, had handed Noah a crumpled piece of paper before we left. It was a receipt for a public storage facility just off the highway. The next morning, we drove there. The facility was incredibly cheap, surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. We found Unit 402. Inside, my entire life was haphazardly piled into a 10 by 10 unclimate-controlled space. My expensive custom sofa was shoved against a leaky wall. Boxes were crushed, dishes were broken, and my wedding dress preservation box was sitting directly on the dirty concrete floor. They had treated my memories like absolute garbage. I pulled out my phone and dialed my parents' house. It rang and rang, eventually clicking over to the answering machine. I called my mother's cell. Voicemail. I called my father's cell. Voicemail. The people who had orchestrated this complete destruction of my life were actively dodging me. They knew exactly what they had done, and they were hiding like the cowards they truly were. Noah wrapped his arms around me in the dusty storage unit, his jaw clenched tight with silent, burning rage. My entire life was packed in cardboard boxes while my parents ignored my calls. We didn't wait for my parents to call back. On Monday morning, right at 8 a.m., Noah and I were standing outside the county clerk's office, waiting for the doors to open. I needed to see the actual, physical paperwork that had stripped me of my home. The clerk printed out the recorded deed and handed it to me across the counter. My hands shook as I read the text. The seller was listed as Olivia, but the signature was not mine. Next to my printed name was my father's signature, explicitly signed, Arthur, as attorney-in-fact for Olivia. The notary stamp belonged to a woman I had never met. The buyer was listed as Apex Investments, LLC, a known local cash-for-houses group that preyed on desperate sellers. But the most sickening part was the sale price. My beautifully renovated house, easily worth $450,000 on the current market, had been sold for a flat $250,000 in a lightning-fast cash transaction. The attached escrow documents showed exactly where that money went. After paying off the remaining $180,000 balance on my mortgage to release the lien, the remaining $70,000 in pure equity was wired directly into a joint checking account belonging to Arthur and Susan. They hadn't just sold my house. They had robbed me of $70,000 in hard-earned equity. I stared at the wire transfer routing numbers, feeling a wave of intense nausea wash over me. Why? Why would they risk multiple felony charges and destroy their daughter's life for 70 grand? They were comfortably middle class. They didn't need the money to survive. Noah pulled out his phone and started making calls to some of his old high school friends who still ran in Brent's messy social circles. By noon, we had the horrifying, unbelievable answer. They had liquidated my absolute biggest asset for a fraction of its true worth. The truth was uglier than I could have ever imagined. Noah's friend, who worked as a bartender at a shady local casino, spilled the entire story. My golden child brother, Brent, hadn't just been finding himself. He had been heavily involved in illegal sports betting and underground poker games. Over the past year, he had racked up a staggering debt of over $60,000 to some incredibly dangerous people. These weren't friendly bookies. These were men who broke kneecaps and threatened families. 2 weeks before my wedding, these men had shown up at my parents' house, looking for Brent. They gave Arthur an ultimatum: pay the debt in full within 30 days, or Brent was going to end up in the ICU, or worse. My parents didn't have 60 grand in liquid cash, but they did have a fraudulent power of attorney document and a daughter who was about to leave the country for 2 weeks. In their twisted, deeply sick minds, saving Brent's life justified completely ruining mine. They knew an LLC cash buyer wouldn't ask too many questions if the price was severely discounted. They used the wedding and the honeymoon as the perfect distraction, forged the necessary activations for the POA, sold my home out from under me, paid off Brent's terrifying debts, and kept the leftover 10 grand for their own troubles. They probably assumed that because I was family, I would scream and cry, but ultimately forgive them. They thought I would just take the loss to keep the family intact. They severely underestimated exactly who they were dealing with. The scapegoat was finally done playing her assigned role. They sacrificed my beautiful sanctuary just to save their golden child from his consequences. I didn't call the police. I didn't go to my parents' house to scream at them. I went straight to the sleek, high-rise downtown office of Victoria, the most feared and aggressive real estate litigator in the entire city. Victoria was a shark in a tailored suit, known for utterly destroying people in civil court. I sat in her plush leather chair and laid out the entire thick stack of documents: the hospital POA, the recorded deed, the wire transfer receipts, and the photos of my belongings rotting in the storage unit. Victoria reviewed the paperwork in absolute silence for 20 minutes. When she finally looked up, her eyes were gleaming with a terrifying, predatory excitement. "Your parents are complete idiots," she stated bluntly, tapping her expensive pen on the deed. This power of attorney from the hospital was conditional. It clearly states it can only be activated if 2 independent physicians certify you as medically incapacitated. They bypassed this by having a dirty notary friend stamp a forged medical affidavit. She leaned across the desk, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "This isn't just civil fraud, Olivia. This is grand larceny, forgery, and a massive breach of fiduciary duty. We are going to sue them for the total market value of the house, punitive damages, emotional distress, and legal fees. Furthermore, we are going to file a quiet title action against the LLC to freeze the property." I felt a dark, cold satisfaction settling deep into my bones. "I don't just want the money back, Victoria," I said, my voice steady and devoid of any lingering familial warmth. "I want them to feel the exact same level of absolute terror and devastation that I felt standing on my porch." She looked up from the documents and promised me we would absolutely destroy them. Before Victoria could drop the legal hammer, I needed to ensure they couldn't hide any of their own assets. I needed them to feel completely comfortable and falsely secure. So, I finally picked up the phone and called my mother. Susan answered immediately, her voice dripping with fake, maternal concern. "Oh, Olivia. Honey, we've been so worried. Where are you?" I forced myself to hyperventilate slightly, channeling every ounce of my trauma into a pathetic, broken performance. "Mom, my house is gone. The locks are changed. We're in a terrible motel." Susan sighed deeply, a masterful performance of reluctant sorrow. "I know, sweetie. I know. We had to do it. Brent was in terrible, terrible trouble. He was going to be hurt, Olivia. We used that medical document you signed. We'll pay you back eventually, I promise. You're strong. You and Noah can easily rent a nice apartment." The sheer audacity almost made me break character, but I bit my lip until it bled. "I have nothing, Mom. I'm completely broke," I whimpered. "We just want to help." Arthur chimed in from the speakerphone. "We can give you a $5,000 loan to get you back on your feet. Come over for Sunday dinner tomorrow. We'll give you the check, and we can all talk about this as a family. A family. They truly believed a tiny fraction of my own stolen money and a roast chicken would fix grand larceny. I swallowed my disgust and agreed to be there at 6 o'clock sharp. I hung up the phone, wiped the fake tears from my eyes, and immediately texted Victoria the green light to proceed with the ambush. I smiled through my tears, knowing they were walking straight into my legal trap. Sunday evening arrived, and Noah and I drove to my parents' house. Walking through their front door required a monumental effort of self-control. The dining room table was beautifully set. Susan was pulling a large roast from the oven, and Arthur was pouring expensive wine. Sitting at the table, looking incredibly smug and perfectly healthy, was Brent. He didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. "Hey, sis," Brent said casually, taking a sip of his wine. "Sorry about the house thing. Crazy situation, you know? But you guys will bounce back. You always do." I wanted to reach across the table and strangle him, but I simply sat down, folding my hands neatly in my lap. Noah sat beside me, completely silent, his eyes locked on Arthur. My parents spent the first 20 minutes of dinner trying to justify their felony. They talked about how family requires sacrifices and how I should be proud that my assets kept my brother safe. "It's just bricks and wood, Olivia," Susan said smoothly, passing the mashed potatoes. "Family is flesh and blood." I glanced at the grandfather clock in the hallway. It was 6:28 p.m. Right on cue, a heavy, authoritative knock echoed from the front door. Arthur frowned, putting down his napkin. Who on earth could that be at dinner time? He muttered, standing up and walking into the foyer. I heard the door open, followed by a deep, unfamiliar voice asking to confirm his identity. "Yes, I'm Arthur," my father replied. "You have been served," the voice said firmly. Arthur walked slowly back into the dining room, his face pale, holding two massive, thick manila envelopes. The process server dropped the massive stack of lawsuits directly onto the dining table. The silence in the dining room was deafening. Arthur slowly opened the first envelope, his hands beginning to tremble violently. I watched the arrogant, entitled color completely drain from his face as his eyes scanned the bold legal headings. Fraudulent conveyance, grand larceny, breach of fiduciary duty, civil conspiracy. "Arthur, what is it?" Susan asked, her voice hitching with sudden panic. She reached over and pulled out her own identical stack of documents. Victoria had been exceptionally thorough. The lawsuit meticulously outlined the forged medical affidavit, the exact routing numbers of the stolen wire transfers, and a demand for over $600,000 in compensatory and punitive damages. You sued us?" Brent stammered, dropping his fork, his smug demeanor instantly vaporizing. "You sued your own parents?" "You stole my house, Brent," I replied, my voice icy and completely devoid of emotion. "Did you really think I was just going to cry and take a $5,000 check?" Arthur collapsed into his chair, gasping for air. "Olivia, you have to stop this immediately. If this goes to a civil trial, the district attorney will see the forged notary stamp. We could face actual felony charges. We could go to federal prison." "I know," I said calmly, standing up from the table. "That's exactly what Victoria said. By the way, the LLC that bought the house was also served today. They are absolutely furious that you sold them a property with a clouded title, and they are preparing to sue you for fraud as well." I looked down at the people who had raised me, feeling absolutely nothing but cold, hard justice. My father looked at me with pure terror as his entire world collapsed completely. The fallout over the next 6 months was absolute, unmitigated chaos. My parents' desperate attempts to guilt-trip me into dropping the lawsuit failed spectacularly. When they realized I was completely serious, the family shattered. The cash buyer LLC, facing Victoria's ruthless quiet title action, panicked and immediately filed a massive cross-claim against Arthur and Susan for selling them a fraudulent deed. Facing utter financial ruin and the very real, terrifying threat of prison time for the forged notary stamp, my parents turned on each other. Arthur blamed Susan for the idea. Susan blamed Arthur for the execution. And Brent, the golden child whom they had risked everything to save? The moment he realized the money was gone and his parents were drowning in legal fees, he packed his bags in the middle of the night and fled the state. He didn't offer a single dime to help them with their defense. He abandoned them to face the consequences alone, proving exactly how worthless their sacrifice had been. Victoria was relentless during the mediation process. To avoid a public trial that would inevitably trigger criminal indictments, my parents were forced to completely surrender. They had to drain their entire life savings, liquidate their own retirement accounts, and take out a massive second mortgage on their own home just to settle the lawsuits. They paid me back the full $450,000 market value of my home, plus an additional $150,000 in punitive damages and legal fees. They were left with absolutely nothing but crippling debt and a shattered reputation in their community. They had ruined my life to save him, and he abandoned them without hesitation. With the settlement money secured, Noah and I didn't try to get the old house back from the LLC. The memories there were too tainted, the walls permanently stained by the ultimate betrayal. Instead, we took the cash and bought a beautiful, sprawling piece of property completely out of state. We built a new home from the ground up, entirely in our own names, far away from the toxic reach of Arthur and Susan. It has been 3 years since that disastrous Sunday dinner. I haven't spoken a single word to my parents or my brother since the day the settlement papers were signed. I heard through the grapevine that Arthur is working as a greeter at a hardware store to pay off their legal debts, and Susan is facing foreclosure on their family home. I don't feel pity, and I don't feel guilt. Therapy has taught me that blood does not automatically grant someone access to your life, your resources, or your sanity. You cannot set yourself on fire to keep entitled people warm. If there is one piece of advice I can offer to anyone dealing with toxic family members, it is this: trust your gut, secure your boundaries in writing, and never, ever hesitate to defend what you have rightfully built. Sometimes, the only way to heal a deep wound is to completely surgically remove the infection. I sit on my new porch today, holding Noah's hand, watching the sunset over our own land. I survived the ultimate family betrayal and built a beautiful life from the ashes.